Welcome to This Is Money podcast. I'm Georgie Frost, and joining me and editor Simon Lambert today is assistant editor Helen Crane. And coming up, what does Rishi mean for our money? Why tenants and landlords need to get on, and NS&i get busy. Plus, how do you track down an old pension? And why is John Lewis winding up its customers? Don't forget, you can stay up to date with all the latest breaking money news. Just go to thisismoney.co.uk or download the app. But first, now, understandably, things have been somewhat political, shall we say, of late. Don't worry, we don't plan to overload you with much more of that. So we are just going to touch, if it's possible. When I say touch, I'm rather optimistic there. But on the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, will we get more of the old Chancellor Rishi or new Prime Ministerial Sunak? And what will it mean for our money? Simon Lambert, initial thoughts?
You would presume that we're going to get the steadying of the ship that has already started with the introduction of stern head teacher Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor, rather than dish out all the sweets, naughty schoolboy Kwasi Kwarteng. And Rishi, as a former Chancellor, now Prime Minister, would continue on in the same vein as he was as Chancellor, but possibly without the largesse that came with dishing out all that cash during the COVID era. And it's easy to be popular, which Rishi was. I think he did a pretty good job. When you are dishing out billions upon billions of pounds, it's harder to be popular when you're trying to settle the bill for that. I think probably the more important question is between the point when Rishi stopped being Chancellor, which July, am I correct? I mean,
yeah.
I've totally lost track of all the stuff that's happened, if I'm going to be entirely honest. I think it was July. And now that he's Prime Minister, what's changed? What's different? I think the big thing is that the picture on inflation is probably worse than it was back then. And that is the main problem for the West's developed economies. And interest rate rises are expected to be larger than they were then. We've also had, if you disregard the mini budget stuff that happened and then unhappened, we've got the energy bills help that's coming in, that's very expensive. And we've seen government borrowing costs spike and then come back down. They're now back to roughly the level before that ill-fated mini budget. But you can't just wipe out that period and pretend it didn't happen, because I think what happened there is the wobble that occurred, which was due to fairly specific circumstances, this negative feedback loop involving the pension funds and the investments that they'd made and the fire sales that they were having to make. But it did show the instability and the stress in the market that perhaps people didn't think was there. And that was maybe the fundamental miscalculation that Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss made. They thought they could get away with those unfunded tax cuts because we could just issue some more debt and people would buy it. And I think what Britain has demonstrated to the world in that whirlwind period that we had is you can't just keep dishing out all of this debt and expecting people to buy it and your borrowing costs to remain low and not have the risk of causing yourselves problems just because you're a, AAA rated Western economy.
Helen, we've seen mortgage rates. Some lenders have dropped them slightly. How lasting has the damage, or do you think the damage will be from the last surreal 3 months and last 1 month particularly?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to tell. Of course, mortgage rates had been going up anyway since the end of last year because the Bank of England had been bringing up the base rate. So they were on an upwards trajectory. That obviously accelerated massively in the last month or so since that disastrous mini budget. You're right to say that a few big lenders have started to tentatively bring them down. I think HSBC and Virgin Money brought them down this week by just small amounts, less than 0.5%. But it shows that things might be kind of moving in the right direction. I think those rate hikes were very much a kind of panicked reaction from the banks when mini budget happened. That said, I don't think they're going to come down substantially. They might go back to around about where they were before the mini budget. So I think the average then was around about 4.5–5%. It's now over 6%. But like Simon said, things can't just go straight back to normal. I think
there's a long road ahead, is there not?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And lenders are feeling extremely cautious at the minute, and much more so after all the chaos of the last month. So I think we're not going to see any big kind of reversals on rates. And of course, inflation is still very high. So
and interest rates expected to go up by quite a way next week still.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the theory, Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee are meeting on the 3rd November, which I believe is Thursday. And the theory is the base rate is going to go up by either 0.75 basis points or 1 basis point. So that's the largest it's gone up
fairly hefty
in recent times. Yeah, fairly hefty.
Simon?
And there's an important point to make there, actually, between the difference between Rishi as Chancellor and Rishi as Prime Minister. So he left as Chancellor on the 5th of July. On the 5th of July, if you'd have said to people that we were going to get a 0.75 percentage points or 1% rise in the base rate, they'd have thought you were slightly crazy. They'd have thought you were way out on one end of the spectrum of the rate hawks, of expecting how much rates would go up. And now we've got it almost baked in that they're going to go up 0.75% on Thursday. And if the Bank of England doesn't raise by that much, there's going to be this disappointment. I mean, last time round, it raised by 0.5%, and there was disappointment that it hadn't gone bigger. So I think those expectations of how rates are going to move up have shifted, very, very dramatically over that period of time. And the impact of that is being felt by borrowers who are anybody who's unfortunate enough to have to remortgage at the moment is seeing their costs. They were thinking they were going to be able to remortgage to around 2.5%. They're looking at 5.5 or 6%. And there's a huge difference there. So if you go back to that period, when Rishi was Chancellor, roughly the best 5-year fixed rate mortgage was about 2.6%. And now it's about 5.6%. That's the difference between paying £900 a month and paying £1,250 a month. Big hit to people's finances. That's on a £200,000 mortgage. People with bigger mortgages is going to have an impact. And this is definitely going to have an impact on the property market and what people can pay. We've discussed this on previous podcasts, but the amount of mortgage borrowing you can buy with the same amount of money has shrunk substantially. And most people don't suddenly have more money that they can spend every month on their mortgage, because also they've got their other bills going up. So I think the challenge for the 6 months to a year ahead is managing our way through that situation. This doesn't affect everybody, doesn't affect renters, but they're going to likely see their landlords try to push up costs in order to cover their own mortgages. Not all landlords have mortgages. Not all homeowners have mortgages. But it's a big enough drain on the country's financial resources that I think it is definitely going to have an impact on the economy. And so the big difference between Chancellor Rishi and Prime Minister Rishi, and I mean, we did joke, didn't we, about this whole Dallas moment where we wake up and it was all a dream, and Rishi walks out the shower. I mean, for a minute, it looked like we were going to wake up and it was all a dream and Boris walked out the shower.
Oh, my word. Yeah.
I mean, but fortunately that we were spared that.
I think that would have still been dreaming, though, in a surreal way. But
exactly. But there is a big difference between the sort of July time and now time. And that is that the picture on the economy really doesn't look so great. But then those moments of peak pessimism, often things get better after them. Maybe we've seen the moment of peak pessimism. Who knows?
Do the markets like Rishi? Have they responded well?
Yeah, they've responded with a sort of general, okay, all right, this looks like business as usual, sensible people in charge, all that kind of stuff. I think the real misfortune amongst all of this is that underlying all of that stuff in the mini budget that was just catastrophically delivered there was probably a concept that deserved some merit, that we do need to try to shake ourselves out of the low growth scenario, business as usual that we've been stuck in.
Yeah.
We do have a problem. We have a problem with productivity in this country. We have a problem with low growth. And we do need to shake ourselves out of that. Whether it was the right way of going about it, even if they hadn't managed to misjudge the situation so badly, I'm not sure. But I can't see anyone trying anything similar for quite some time.
So isn't it in this instance the timing as well? Maybe just ride out the storm that's here at the minute and see how we're going to go. I said we were only going to touch on this, so we are, but just ever so briefly, Helen, other noises about our money from I was about to call him the Chancellor then, I can't get that out of my head, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak. So things like pension triple lock, I mean, he pushed back the budget, seems a sensible idea, it seemed very soon. Wouldn't have had a lot of time to speak with Chancellor Jeremy Hunt about ideas, so that's been pushed back. Noises he's making about what we can expect for our money tax decisions. Anything else that we haven't already discussed before?
Honestly, we don't really know a lot. There haven't been a lot of those policy noises because I think sensibly Rishi doesn't want to do anything more to potentially spook the markets. He's kind of keeping very quiet on what he might do, at least until that mini budget, which, you know, why wouldn't he? If there was more U-turns or more kind of new policies coming out, it could kind of undo all the slight amount of goodwill that the government has managed to claw back in the last sort of week or so by getting Rishi back in. Yeah, the triple lock is one thing there's kind of noises around. So during Liz Truss's brief premiership, there were sort of rumours swirling that she might scrap the triple lock, but then she turned around and said, no, I'm confirming it, it's staying. Apparently there are rumours again that Rishi now might look at scrapping it. We don't know.
Wait and see for the budget, I think.
Yeah, I do think, there is kind of sense that the triple lock probably can't last forever. The government did in 2022 under the Boris government, they committed, I think, that it would last until the end of the Parliament, which is 2025. So perhaps it will last till then and then go. We just don't know, but it's definitely something that seems like it could be on the table.
We shall see. Simon mentioned there about renting. Helen, we love to hate them, but tenants will be worse off if too many landlords cut and run. So says you in your article. You've written about your own personal experience of being a renter, and you've come up with 5 ways to improve the situation from both sides. I am desperate to hear what they are as a renter myself. Talk to me, Helen.
Sure. So while I was writing this article, I worked out that I have been a renter for 15 years, 11 of those years in London. So I think quite well qualified to talk on the subject, if I do say so myself. I've lived in 10 rented flats in London in 11 years, which makes me sound like a terrible tenant. I'm actually not. But just, circumstances,
How many of those would you say were your choice? And how many do you think were sort of the Section 21 no-fault evictions from landlords? Because I actually think I beat you. I've got 20 years of rental experience, and I cannot even begin to count how many places I've been to, but a fair few. And the last 50% have been Section 21s.
Yeah, I'd say maybe half and half. And it depends what you count as my choice, right? So I haven't been told to leave all of them, but you might say, a particularly terrible housemate, not really, ideally wouldn't need to leave, but I'm not staying there. So,
Right.
Is that my choice, or is that me being essentially forced out?
Constructive dismissal. I get it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So in this 15 years of experience, what have you come up with that's going to sort out what is just a shambles at the moment, the rental market?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I was prompted to write this article is there's been quite a lot of news lately around landlords sort of struggling to make money. I know we feel very sorry for them, but it is an important issue. And actually, it's an important issue for tenants as well. So the last few years, landlords have been finding it harder to make profits on their properties. There's loads of reasons for this. So 2017, there was some sort of tax changes. So landlords used to be able to offset their mortgage interest against their taxes. They can't do that anymore. There was also a stamp duty surcharge brought in, so they paid more tax when they bought a property. And that kind of started a process where over the last few years, landlords have been kind of finding it more difficult, especially these smaller landlords. You know, when we talk about landlords, a lot of people think of, you know, big money kind of property magnates with tens, hundreds of properties, like absolutely raking it in. But I think what people forget is that about 40% of landlords are what we call accidental landlords. So people who, you know, say they've owned a flat and then moved in with a partner and they've decided, you know, they're able to kind of keep their flat and rent it out. You know, they're still obviously in a very fortunate position, but, you know, they're not maybe the hugely kind of rich people that we expect. The reason why I brought this up this week is that there was some research from Hamptons, which is an estate agent, saying the number of landlords owning their properties in limited companies. So if you're a landlord, you can either own property in your personal name or you can put it into a company structure. That's absolutely rocketed. So there are now 300,000 buy-to-let property companies, up from about 90,000 5 years ago. Okay. So loads of landlords are doing this. The reason they're doing it is because that cuts their tax liabilities, helps them save a bit of money. Also, on top of all this, mortgage rates are obviously going up for homeowners. They're also going up for landlords. Today, the average buy-to-let mortgage rate is about 7% for a landlord. So landlords are struggling to make money. The reason this matters for tenants is that if landlords are making less money, they're going to do one or two things. They're going to put their rents up or they're going to sell their properties. Both of these are bad news, because if too many landlords sell their properties, that's going to make rents go up as well. Because in the same way that the for sale housing market works, it all runs on demand. If there's fewer properties to rent out, it's going to be more expensive to rent the ones that are available, because there's going to be more competition. So while tenants really, really don't want to feel sorry for landlords, we do need to keep landlords around. I do the good ones.
Good landlords.
The bad ones can go.
But we have seen
free to sell up and leave.
We have seen though, like the number of available properties has, I think it's halved, hasn't it, since 2019, so before the coronavirus pandemic. And the problem is landlords are selling up, but they're selling up to property buyers, and you still need people, you still need rental properties, and that we're not filling the gap at the moment with that. It's Simon.
But this was in theory what we wanted. I mean, this is the end result of the crackdown on buy-to-letters and landlords that was brought through from George Osborne, you know, when he made it much more expensive to buy a property in order to let it out, or a second home. He squeezed the tax treatment on them. So previously you could offset all of your mortgage interest against your tax bill. Which, I mean, is a business principle, you know, and it means that you only pay tax on your profit rather than on your revenue. And the way it changed with the 20% tax credit, now some landlords are now paying tax on their revenue rather than their profit. And the idea was that they wanted to make it harder for landlords to enter the market, less favorable for landlords to be in the market, and that those landlords would then sell up to home buyers, largely first-time buyers. There was sort of this long-running thing in the buy-to-let industry claiming that buy-to-let landlords and first-time buyers weren't going up against each other because they didn't buy the same type of properties or own the same type of properties. Most people's general experience does fly in the face of that claim, because under most people's general experience, the properties that are most likely to be rented out do appear to be the ones that would be most likely to be popular with first-time buyers, although you do get family homes and stuff rented out. But the idea was that somehow business would step into the gap and you'd have a more professional system, build to rent and so on. I don't think that has happened. And where we have seen build to rent and we have seen businesses step into the gap, you're finding that actually the properties that are being rented out to people are a premium product. They're more expensive than the average rental flat or average rental house. And again, this is true of the new build property market. There are claims that the reason why house prices are so high is because we don't build enough homes. And if we just built more homes, house prices would come down. That's not true. And there's been lots of research that's been done into that, quite, in-depth and proper extensive research. And the first thing that it latches onto is that new build homes are sold as a premium product. They cost you more than a secondhand home. And builders then deliberately don't build out at rates that would drag the prices down through an increase in supply, because they're not stupid. They want to make money, and they don't want to drag house prices down in the area where they've got the land and then they're trying to make the profits, and they do their calculations and they build out at rates that doesn't lower the prices. So I think what we've seen is an intervention into the market that has had a consequence that has then had an unintended consequence of the consequence. And caught in the middle of this, of course, are people who are renting.
Tenants,
and people
always.
who are tenants, and tenants who can't actually, it's not like a binary choice of, okay, I can't afford to rent this property because my landlord's being squeezed and they're going to have to sell up. But that's okay, because I can just buy it instead, because there's a massive hurdle there, which is raising the deposit in order to pay the whacking great price that you have to for property nowadays. And that is a function of super low interest rates. Now, long term, the mortgage rate hikes that we are seeing and the much higher level of mortgage interest should, if everything was just left alone and we stopped staging mad interventions, should bring prices down. Really painful for anybody renting, because it's like they've been sitting there working away, beavering away at saving their deposit as house prices go up faster than they could possibly save. Some people have said to me recently, they've finally got to that point, and then it's like, oh, but now the mortgage is going to cost me £400 more a month, and now I can't afford it anymore. Ultimately, if you leave all this stuff alone, things should balance out. And it should be that the prices then come down, and then the mortgages aren't costing you so much, and you don't have to save as big deposits. But does anybody here on this podcast, or anybody listening to this podcast, genuinely think that the government of whatever hue that we have, now or in the years to come, is not going to meddle again in the property market and then make things even worse?
It's constant. We've spoken about it in the many years we've been doing the podcast, whether it's impacting on tenants or impacting on first-time buyers. It always seems to be any of the tinkering around the edges in the housing market, which is supposed to help, again, those people that are most vulnerable, but in more of a difficult situation, like first-time buyers to buy a home, or tenants, actually seems to be backfiring and hitting those people they're trying to help the most. And I mentioned that because I mentioned the Section 21, the no-fault eviction that the government have proposed, may not happen, who knows, idea where in the past, when you come to the end of your fixed term, the landlord or you only has to give 2 months notice. Well, for me, who had one recently, 2 months, it was difficult in this difficult rental market, but it wasn't impossible. If I had kids and a family I needed to move around to, what do you do? It's a very difficult situation. But if you get rid of something like that, then landlords who've already been hit, as you mentioned there, Simon, with tax changes in the past, it's become less attractive to be a landlord. We've also got energy regulations coming in 2025. A lot of landlords will just think, I've got to pay how much? £10,000 or something to upgrade my house to make it an energy rating C or something. They will sell out of the market. And Helen, as you said, we need landlords. We need good landlords. So what are the 5 ways you've come up with to improve the situation from both sides?
Sure. The first thing I've said is we need to sort out this eviction process. So as you said, there's Section 21, which is no fault evictions. And there's also Section 8, which is essentially at fault evictions. This is when a landlord wants their tenant to leave for, something they've actually done wrong. So, they've damaged the property or they haven't paid rent, and you have to go through the court for that. Our sister title, Money Mail, had a case study this week of a landlady who really sort of fallen foul of this process. So she'd rented out her flat in London to a guy who sort of seemed perfectly nice when she met him. He had nice references, I think one from an aristocrat, which is slightly bizarre, but that might seem attractive to you as a landlord, someone who's possibly got a bit of money. But it turned out that when he moved in, he paid the first month's rent and then did not pay any rent for 6 months. So that was about £30,000 that he owed her. She ended up going through the courts to try and get him out. He refused to leave. And it took her 456 days to successfully evict this person. That's because there's such big backlogs to get these court orders, because during COVID, evictions were probably rightly banned, people were having a difficult time and we find it difficult to find somewhere else to live. But that created this huge court backlog. So it's taking landlords a really, really long time to get out tenants who are, in those tenants that minority tenants that are the bad ones. I do think most tenants are sort of respectful in the way they also think that, maybe not the majority, but a lot of landlords are, decent people as well. But, they need to be able to root out when you do have a bad tenant. Landlords need to know that there's a sort of easy, and not necessarily easy, but, a quick enough way that you can get them out, because experiences like the one this lady has had, that really will be something that causes landlords to leave the market. Some kind of nightmare experience, and taking over a year to get them out, that could put off landlords from continuing to be landlords. So that's my number one suggestion. A few other things based on my own sort of personal experience. I do think longer tenancies should be the norm. So generally, people still just tend to sign a 1-year lease when they rent out a property. When I rented the flat I'm in now, I decided to ask the landlord if he'd be okay with 2-year lease. So it gives me a bit more security, prevents me hopefully from a big rent rise at the end of the first year, although landlords can kind of put rents up during a contract in certain circumstances. And also I think for the landlord, he knows that he's not going to have to re-rent the flat after a year. That obviously costs landlords money as well. So I think that's a bit of a win-win, hopefully. Something else that really annoys me is asking rents. So a lot of people who've been out of the rental market for a while don't necessarily know about this, but in the same way that when you go to buy a house, you have the sort of asking price, and then you have the price that you actually offer. That's now happening with rental properties. I will say that I live in London. This might be different sort of in other places around the country. But the last time I was looking for flats, a flat would be advertised at X amount. You would turn up, have a look around, and then the agent would say, okay, so we need your best bids for this by the end of the day. Email me with the maximum you'd be willing to pay for this property. And everyone else who was there would have to do the same. Yeah, absolutely shocking. I do think it's unfair. First of all, it's kind of false advertising, because, I'd gone to see a flat because I thought it was a price that I could afford, and to go and see it and then be expected to pay hundreds of pounds more, it's not. And also, I think
people are desperate and it's exploitative. Sorry, it's people's homes. Ooh.
It's true, and it's also a deeper issue though, and I think it could actually sort of hit landlords in the pocket in the end, because what that system is doing, it's pushing tenants to stretch their budgets to the absolute limit. So, if you're paying a huge chunk of your salary on your rent, can't possibly afford to pay any more. If the landlord then wants to put the rent up again after a year, as is their right, especially sort of costs are going up, what are you going to do? You're going to leave because you can't stretch your budget anymore. Some people get a pay rise every year, a lot of people don't, and then you're forced to leave. The landlord comes, oh, can you pay an extra £100? No, I can't. You're going to leave, and then the landlord's stuck with that situation again of having an empty flat or having to pay to replace it. So yeah, I think asking rents we don't like. Just a couple of other things I suggested: clear rules for rent rises. So at the minute, the law says that landlords can increase rents by market rates for the area, which in practice means they can have a quick look on Rightmove or Zoopla, see what some other flats are renting for, and say, yeah, I'll charge my tenants that, which I think is just so arbitrary. And it also means that tenants can't really plan for rises. I think, what I'd maybe like to see is you sign a contract, and either it's written into your contract or it's kind of something that the landlord verbally agrees with you. Your rent's going to go up by X% each year. Probably not inflation, because that's 10% at the minute, and that would be quite extreme. But, say, okay, I am going to raise the rent, but I'll do it by 4%, 5% a year. It's coming. You can budget for it. No one likes a rent rise, but at least it would be, it's coming and you can cope with it. And finally, I think, George, this is something that I've mentioned to you before as a fellow renter, is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but I would love to see a system where tenants can provide references
Oh yeah.
about tenants on their landlords as landlords can about tenants. Actually, it's only fair, because we've all had some terrible landlords. And wouldn't you, when I've moved out of flats that I really, really had a terrible time with, I would love to go to the next tenant and just say, mate, you want to steer well clear of him. I mean, I don't know who would administrate this or how it would work or why any landlord would agree to it. I just think, can we just set up a WhatsApp group of tenants and we'll all just, dish the dirt on our landlords?
The reason I mentioned it is because having been recently chucked out of my house for £200 extra, I hope my landlord doesn't get anyone in the flat for ages. I mean, it's a nice flat if you don't mind not sleeping, because it's very centrally located. You often get 1 a.m. deliveries, 5 a.m. bins. And I kind of feel like I should tell people that who are planning to spend a shed load of money on this apartment is, by the way, it's great if you don't like sleep. My problem with anything like that, though, is a bit like Uber, for example, is yes, you could rate your driver, but they can rate you too. So you then become quite fearful of saying anything at all, because what if that impacts you? What if other landlords start looking at you and you don't get any people renting their property to you because they've seen this Trustpilot review of a pretty peeved off landlord that you criticize saying something bad about you. So I don't know how that would work, but I do think when certainly letting agents, I think, obviously I haven't bought a house, but when, Simon, you can correct me here, when you sell a house, you have to be very open and honest about, the neighbors, is there Japanese knotweed, all these sorts of issues that you have to explain. I believe you should, as a letting agent, have a sort of exit meeting with your tenant who will then tell you all the issues with the property. And they have an onus then to tell the next tenant, by the way, these are the issues. Would that work? Do you reckon, Simon? What else do you think would work?
I don't think that's a bad idea.
Thanks.
I mean, there is a form that you have to fill in, like that does ask you various questions when you buy a property that the seller has to fill in, and they're legally obliged to tell the truth. So yeah, if you didn't tell them about bad neighbors and stuff like that, then that could be an issue, and maybe there should be a form that has to be brought in. There's been lots of extra legislation brought in for letting agents over the years, but it doesn't seem to be overly helping. I mean, I guess the main one was the whole trying to remove this thing where people were being charged loads of money for contracts and references and contract renewals and stuff like that. And agents were ramping up the cost of these, and also in some cases double charging, because they were charging the landlord and the tenant. Again, I think there is a scenario where you get good landlords, you get bad landlords, and good landlords are great and they really need to be praised, and good landlords need good tenants and good tenants need good landlords, but you get good letting agents as well. But you can't always, the problem is with a letting agent, like with an estate agent, when supply is tight and there's not much going around and you don't really have a huge amount of choice, it's not like you can just choose by letting agent in the same way that you can't just choose by estate agent. You have to go with whatever estate agent someone's put the house on the market with.
Exactly. That's it for part 1.
I'm joined now by Sam North of eToro for our weekly look at the markets. Sam, how's the week been?
Yeah, it's been a really interesting one in global markets. We started off with the Rishi Sunak news being confirmed PM, and whilst markets were expecting that, certainly by Monday anyway, it has at least given us some sort of stability in the short term, which was needed. Investors and traders in the UK will be sort of watching, though, over the coming weeks to see what they can do, what they can't do, to decide whether, it's a good investment. Other than that, it has been a real battle, actually, between positive and negative news. The positive news first is that we saw dovish central bank meetings from both the Bank of Canada and the European Central Bank, despite them both raising interest rates. And we also saw the Bank of Japan only seeing inflation at 1.6% next year, which is right for some. To wrap up the good news there, markets did push higher a little bit, and we also saw a good, solid US GDP report. If that was the only news we had, markets would be a lot higher. However, the big tech earnings have come out this week and they've been pretty poor across the board. Meta, Alphabet, Amazon, Microsoft and Apple all reported this week, and it wasn't a good showing. These big tech companies make up roughly 20% of the S&P 500 market cap. So bad earnings there have really sort of dragged the market from its highs.
And what do we have to look forward to next week?
Yeah. Look, another busy one. Monday's the last trading day of the month, so some people will need to make note of that. But then on Wednesday we've got the Federal Reserve, and that's going to be the main event, no doubt. Investors would love to hear a dovish twang in the statement and conference, but if they were to, come out and still be hawkish, then this market will struggle to push on for the next couple of weeks. But hopefully those signs from the Bank of Canada, ECB and Bank of Japan will follow through to next Wednesday. On the Friday, we also have the latest US jobs report, which is still up there with one of the most important economic events. Elon Musk and Twitter deal has gone through today. But I'm sure there'll be a few more comments coming out regarding that. He's now taken or about to take the stock private for the next couple of years, apparently. So something to keep a watch on. Some of the biggest earnings next week: Berkshire Hathaway, Eli Lilly, Pfizer, PayPal, Airbnb, and Starbucks. All big names, but nowhere near as big as the ones we had this week. So last week this week I should say, dominated by earnings. Next week will all be about the Fed on Wednesday. Buckle in.
And then we've got the Bank of England the day after, haven't we? Once again.
That's right. Wednesday, Thursday. It's going to be a big sort of couple of days. And it will be interesting to actually hear from the Bank of England, after what's gone on in the UK politics. Real key and interesting week.
Okay, Sam, thank you very much. We will speak to you next week.
Thank you, Simon.
Welcome back. The good news for savers keeps coming. This time it's the turn of National Savings and Investments. They've at last boosted the rates on a number of its easy access and fixed savings deals. So, Helen, what's happening?
Yeah, this is a bit of good news. Savings rates are one of the few good bits of news for our finances at the moment. So they are going up as interest rates rise. So this week it's National Savings and Investments, NS&i, the Treasury-backed bank. They've increased rates on quite a few of their accounts. So some of them are actually at the highest they've been in over a decade. So that's the direct saver and income bonds accounts. They've both gone up by 0.6 percentage points from 1.2% to 1.8%. They're easy access accounts, so you can withdraw your money whenever you need. To put that in some context, someone putting £10,000 in either of those accounts would earn £180 in interest over the course of a year. In addition, the direct ISA deal has gone up from 0.9% to 1.75%. So that's quite a big hike, almost a doubling. And the junior ISA account has gone from 2.2% to 2.7%. So, these are sort of respectable hikes in interest rates. However, they are not topping our independent savings rate tables. They're good, but they're not the best. So at the moment on an easy access, the best you can get is 2.81%. That's with Al Rayyan Bank, and on easy access ISAs as well. So NS&i is 1.75%, and the best you can get at the market is 2.25%. So good to see them raising rates, but they're not the best around. They are better than an insult account though, which is those accounts.
I was going to say, Simon, what do you make of this? It's not an insult account. It's any good. So NS&i products worth it?
You're fully protected by the government. They've got your
money is
back
protected 85 grand anyway, aren't you?
But if you've got more than that, you're fully protected.
True.
But there's not that many people with more than that in one savings account. And if you have got more than that in one savings account, then having it in the absolute best rate account is definitely going to pay off for you. It's nice to see NS&i raising rates. I think it's been a while coming. They had raised the premium bond rates. I'd like to personally see them go up by more and be offering people an even better rate of return. But, the banks and the small challenger banks and some of the building societies are leading the way on rates. And the big banks aren't keeping up, and neither is NS&i either. But I think that it's really important for savers to take a look at these rates. And if they're on NS&i rates, take a look at them, see if they need to move, see if there are better rates out there, see if they should be moving to the top rates that are on offer. Go to thisismoney.co.uk/save, where you will find our independent best buy savings tables, and also potentially for people to consider a savings platform. Raisin, for example, Hargreaves Lansdown Active Savings, that's got a redoing its bonus deal for people who sign up, because the great advantage of these places is that you are managing your money all in one place. You don't get a full choice of all the rates on the market, but you're getting rates that are as near to the top of the best buy tables pretty much as you can get, or in some cases actually might even be slightly better. And it means that you're looking at your savings in one place, and you're less likely to allow your money to fall onto old legacy accounts where you're getting paid a pittance by people. And actually now we're starting to talk about the fact that people are genuinely missing out on some interest here, rather than it just being like, oh, well, it's like only like £6 a year, so it doesn't really make any difference kind of thing.
All right, then. Now everyone is auto-enrolled into a new pension each time we change jobs. We're building up ever more pots to forget about. The number of lost pensions has jumped 75% to 2.8 million over the past 4 years. That's worth 26.6 billion, or £9,500 on average, that we've just forgotten about. The cost of living crisis has highlighted the importance of tracking down lost pensions to boost your eventual retirement income. This is according to a new industry campaign. Simon, how on earth are we losing our pots? What, do we don't care about money?
Well, I mean, we managed to lose 2 prime ministers in the space of a few months, didn't we? So it's no wonder people are losing their pensions as well. We move jobs, I think, is fundamentally the main answer to this. And we have pots that we've built up with different employers around the place. There are also people pay money into SIPs, and then they open one with one investing platform, and then they open another with another investing platform, and they don't necessarily lose it. They probably just don't pay any attention to it. And I think the important thing with pensions is you do need to pay some attention to them. They are long-term investment plans for your retirement. And to be clear here, we're talking about defined contribution pensions, the ones that you have to pay into and your employer pays into, and then you build up a pot and then you have to pay for your retirement out of it, not defined benefit pensions, also known as final salary pensions, which is the ones where you pay in some money and your employer promises to pay you a certain amount for every single year that you work for them. With those ones, you don't really need to worry about that. They're going to pay you. They have to pay you. You don't have any choice where that's invested. Defined contribution pensions, on the other hand, you do have a choice. And what you can find with some old work pensions is they may not be invested in the right way for you. You might be in a default fund, but the default fund might not be the best option for you. It might not be a very good default fund. Also, you may be paying higher charges because you're not an employee anymore. This does occur. Or you may be paying higher charges full stop than you could be paying by moving it to an investment platform. And the advantage of moving your pensions to an investment platform is you can see them all in one place. Or it could be that actually this is the best place for your money because it's invested in a broad global stock market tracker fund and you're benefiting from very low fees, in which case maybe just leave it where it is. But do engage with it. But you don't have to be engaging with it every single month. This is literally a once a year thing that you can sit down and do. And so here's the tips to track down your lost pensions. Mm-hmm. 1, past employers. List all the places where you have worked. Most people should be able to do this off the top of their head, unless they've been very promiscuous with their employment, and then they might have to start going through their paperwork. Old paperwork. This is where it starts to get trickier. Now you need to track down the pension paperwork from the places where you did work. This is where many people will start to fall down because their filing system may not be entirely up to scratch. But the good news is,
or you may be promiscuous with where you live as well, which
exactly. Contact details. Have you told them that you've moved? Are they sending statements to your old address, to your rental flat that you lived in 10 rental flats ago, for example? Because you weren't that promiscuous with your employers, but you were promiscuous with your rental flats.
Oh, my pension information,
like Helen and I,
is scattered all over London. I have absolutely no idea.
I mean, this is an audio medium, right? So our listeners cannot see the faces of the two people I'm talking to as I was suggesting that they might have pension statements scattered around all their old rental properties, and they were just going, yeah.
With that in mind, though, Simon, and I don't recommend this for everyone, and do research, etc., etc. I pulled my pensions together exactly for that reason. I've moved around so much, I just can't deal with the admin. I am a typical case study of someone who's worked in loads of jobs and lived in loads of places. I have a commitment thing, I think, but which means I am gonna lose something. I also have a bad memory as well.
This is why, actually, to potentially, to her annoyance, there are many things in my life that I've never changed, that I've always just used my mum's address for and never changed the address on, because I'm like, at least I know that's the one place where they'll always go to, and I will eventually get them. Anyway, get your old paperwork. If you can't find it, just contact the old employer and say to them, I used to work for you, I had a pension, I'm trying to track it down, sort it out, change my details to the place where I actually live nowadays. They'll give you the details in order to get in touch with them. If there are any gaps, we don't have a pension statement for an employer, you can use the government's pension tracing service. Okay, and you can find the information on how to do this at thisismoney.co.uk/pensions. You will find this article. Get in contact, obviously, with them. You're probably going to need your national insurance number. Most people should know that. You might have to track that one down too. And also, obviously, you'll need to make sure that you didn't already transfer out of this pension into another pension, because you'll be met with a blank look on their face. They go, no, sorry, no, you already actually did this bit of admin 3 years ago. And then you want a pension valuation. You want to ask how much your pension is worth and get an up-to-date statement. Now, this is where it might come back into play for the old defined benefit pensions, because you might have some of those that you don't remember about. And whilst you don't need to think about where they're invested and how much you're paying on them and various things like that, this does factor into the whole, how much am I likely to have in retirement? What is my pot likely to look like? And to give a practical example of this, my wife worked for Tesco for a while, and when she was working at Tesco, they still had a defined benefit pension scheme. It wasn't final salary, it's career average, but she gets a pension statement from them once a year, I think, tells her theoretically how much this pension is going to be worth in the future. And that's a good thing to know and a good thing to have, because it's like, right, this is how much pension I've got from there. So how much do I need to be saving here? Do I need to be putting more in? Do I need to be putting less in? The further you are away from your potential retirement date, the less you probably need to be worrying and thinking about that. Although it does always pay to be paying into a pension earlier rather than later, and keep paying in and pay as much in as you can. But obviously, if you are older and you're getting closer to that retirement date, it becomes even more important to have a really good picture of exactly what you might be in line for and what you need to do to plan ahead for it.
Sage advice as always. Right, finally, Helen, complaints. I naturally think you deal with complaints a lot, so this one's for you. They've been pouring in, not just from me, sorry. They've been pouring into you guys from loyal John Lewis and Waitrose customers. Why, you ask? I mean, how could they be unhappy with John Lewis and Waitrose? Well, many with high credit scores say they're either being turned down for a new John Lewis credit card or given lower limits on the amount they can spend on. Helen, what's going on? What's the issue here?
Sure. So the John Lewis credit card, it's quite popular. It has some quite good perks. People who regularly shop at Waitrose and John Lewis, quite a lot of them sort of take advantage of this card. You get points when you shop at Waitrose and things like that. But recently, John Lewis has switched its credit card supplier from HSBC to a company called New Day. And this seems to have unleashed all kinds of problems. So John Lewis wrote to its credit card customers and said all they had to do was fill out a form and brand new card would arrive in the post. But loads of customers have written to our sister title, Money Mail, and told them that it was not that easy. A lot of them, when they reapplied, have been told their credit limit has been slashed, or that they may even have been rejected and had the card taken away. The worrying thing is that a lot of them have told us that they actually had perfect credit scores. So not quite clear what's happening here. John Lewis is claiming that 96% of those who reapplied were accepted and that 84% were offered the same or a higher credit limit. But, why are these customers who haven't done anything wrong not being offered the same kind of terms on their credit card? It seems very unfair.
Now, this is a classic example of company maintaining that there isn't a problem here, despite there appearing to be a large amount of evidence that there might be, and some very unhappy people. I don't know what John Lewis was playing at here. I don't know what the new credit card provider was playing at. Presumably John Lewis was like, well, we're going to move it from one bank to a new credit card provider and it'll all be totally smooth and there won't be any problems. there definitely appears to be quite a lot of problems going on. There's certainly quite a lot of people getting in contact with us to complain and complaining that their credit card has essentially been rendered useless because their credit limit has been slashed from one large number to one much smaller number. And I don't have a John Lewis credit card, right? Or some people have even had their accounts closed. I don't have a John Lewis credit card. I do have a Barclay card though, and this happened with Barclay card a couple of years back.
I remember.
Where Barclay card randomly slashed loads of people's credit limits, writing to them and maintaining that they'd reassess their because financial circumstances had changed. That was what my letter said. I took Barclay cards to task over this because it was during COVID. My financial circumstances hadn't actually changed at all. They hadn't, and they did admit that they hadn't actually assessed my financial circumstances at all. That bit in the letter was just not true. But I had my credit limit slashed from a number that was way too high because Barclaycard used to just regularly send me text messages saying, we're putting your credit limit up. If you don't want it to go up, you have to call us. And so they just randomly stick it up. And then they cut it all the way down to £1,000. When I contacted them, they said, well, that's because you've not been using we've looked and you haven't been using your card recently. I was like, well, it's COVID. Nobody's been able to do much recently. And also, the thing I did used to use my credit card for was paying for holidays for my family holidays. And unfortunately, I can't take my family on holiday for £1,000. It's really difficult because we have to go on holiday during the school holidays to even get flights for 4 of us for £1,000. So the credit card was rendered pretty much useless for the use that I had for it. Now, Barclaycard's business, it can do whatever it wants, and so on and so on. But I have been a Barclaycard customer for quite a long time, and I was really, really annoyed by it. But you know what? I chalked that one up to experience. Well, I complained to them quite a lot, and I wrote a number of columns, and I did quite a lot of moaning about it on this podcast. If you work that as chalking it up to experience, I chalked it up to experience. And I just use my American Express more. But there's a double whammy here for John Lewis and Waitrose because they're not just issuing people with credit cards. These are the people who shop at their shops, and they're probably among their most loyal shoppers. And I always think it's a good idea for businesses not to annoy their loyal customers. And that does appear to be the case of what has happened here. Arguably, only a small number of them, but a small number can be quite vocal. And this story is going to rumble on and on and on. And it isn't just appearing in our pages, it's appearing in all of the personal finance pages of all of our rivals as well. And they do appear to have spectacularly shot themselves in the foot here.
All right, then. That's it for this week. You can keep up to date with all the latest breaking money news. Just go to thisismoney.co.uk or download the app. And if you have any comments or questions for the team or anything you'd like them to look into, Simon?
You can email us at editor@thisismoney.co.uk. You could tweet us at thisismoney, and you can come to thisismoney.co.uk/podcast to join in the debate and reader comments. And next week, we will be back with the same Prime Minister and the same Chancellor, believe it or not.
Are you sure about that, Simon?
I'm pretty sure we will. I'm pretty sure we will. I'll eat my hat if we're not.
All right, then. And if you like our podcast, why not rate us wherever you found us? It helps other people find us too.